Hi, and welcome to this live reading from Blood and Vengeance, the Casket Girls Book 2 by A.D. Brazeau, and this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1, Desiree. Stone gargoyles watched, their hard eyes following Desiree as she crept through the graveyard. Mist blanketed the tops of the above-ground tombs, creating a claustrophobic feel and making her hyper-aware of the danger surrounding them. Theron slunk ahead, his crouched figure of dark hair and dark clothes blending into the night. After hearing several reports of mysterious deaths around the cemetery, Theron had concluded the remaining casket vampires must be sheltered within one of the graveyard's many mausoleums. Vampires are attracted to death, Theron had said as he paced back and forth in the parlor of the mansion that had become their home. Theron paced incessantly, setting Desiree's teeth on edge. She barely knew the man. He had been a stranger to her before becoming involved with fellow casket girl Greer. The two of them had taken in Desiree and their other friends, Fawcett and Sylvie. While Greer was serving her 3 months in the Underworld with her mother Persephone and her stepfather Hades, Theron meant to distract himself from his missing love by cleaning out the remaining half a dozen vampires who stalked the Vogue Care. Desiree, never one to sit on her laurels, had volunteered to help. She hadn't much appreciated being a victim of the foul creatures, feeling she could happily deal a little payback now that she had regained her strength. Fawcett remained at the mansion with their still fragile friend Sylvie. Sylvie had been drained of her precious lifeblood more furiously than any of the others, and was still recovering. Desiree feared she may never be at full strength. The night was cold, a chill wind sweeping her long red hair off her shoulder. Desiree pulled her gray wool coat tighter around her throat as if that one gesture could warm her. She'd wrapped a thick scarf tightly around her neck, more for protection from sharp teeth than the cold. The scarf was beginning to stifle a little, as if it was cutting off her ability to breathe freely. Above-ground tombs stood silent on either side of her, their stone facades protecting the decaying bodies within. She shivered. Desiree didn't used to be a morbid person. Despite her less than appealing life back in Paris, she'd tried her best to remain as cheerful as possible. Happiness was not always easy to maintain, not when she'd had to do unspeakable things in back alleys to make enough money to fill her belly, but she'd tried. If she hadn't tried, despair would have won out, and who knows what she would have done had that happened. Now, however, with death surrounding her, blood and the taking of it having become her reality, morbidity seemed natural. Gravel shifted ahead as Theron turned to face her. He was crouched alongside a tomb out of sight as a mausoleum just ahead. The mausoleum was the last one to be checked for the living dead. It was also the largest, and sitting as it did at the back of the graveyard offered whatever may lurk inside more protection from prying eyes. Theron put up a hand, his black eyes intent on Desiree. He meant for her to wait while he performed the initial reconnaissance. She gave one curt nod to show she understood. As daring as she felt, she wasn't a fool. Theron was a demon, cursed by Hades to live the entirety of his eternity as a bloodsucker. Not quite a vampire, but close enough. Whatever Theron called himself, he was far stronger than Desiree, who was nothing but a mere human. Theron possessed not only strength, but the ability to change his form and manipulate energy. All Desiree could do was wield a wooden stake, which she had to admit she'd become rather good at. She spent the early mornings running up and down the stairs at the back of the mansion, building the muscles in her legs. Then she'd take a big stone from the courtyard and curl it to develop her arms. She was determined to never be weak again. Theron had taught her where on the body to thrust the stake, even going as far as to make a dummy from an old mattress. She'd practiced over and over until her hands bled. So even though in no way as strong as Theron, she felt empowered enough to give it a try, and if she died, at least she would have died doing something. Never again would she lie on her back for any man. She'd had enough of her body being taken, and she'd certainly never let her blood be taken again. She'd rather die. Theron returned her nod with one of his own. This was the moment she'd been training for. 2 weeks of preparation wasn't very long, but it would have to be long enough. He turned back toward the mausoleum. The crackle of dirt under his boot sounded louder than a booming cannon. Surely if the beasts were within, they'd be alerted to their presence. When Desiree suggested they attack the vampires during daylight, Theron had shut her idea down. There will be too many people about, he'd said. If we can surprise them after nightfall, we can take them. Vampires are stupid, mindless creatures, easy to overcome. Desiree wasn't as confident as Theron, but as long as she was able to stake on just one of the vile beasts, she could die a happy woman. Theron crept, still in a crouch, up to the stone door of the mausoleum. She followed only as far as Theron's previous position and stopped, bent at the waist with one hand on the side of the tomb. Her heart hammered in her chest. Desiree did her best to take deep breaths, willing herself to stay calm, to stay ready. Everything in her screamed to turn tail and run for the mansion, for safety, to lock the gates behind her, sealing herself and her friends inside. Self-preservation was a powerful thing. She almost did just that. She almost turned to flee, her foot itching in the gravel to propel her body backward. Her body and mind were making the decision for her. Right at that moment she began to turn. Theron looked back. Almost as if he knew what she was thinking, maybe he could hear her heart or smell her fear. Whatever the case, his face softened, and he inclined his head toward the gates of the graveyard, almost as if he were giving her permission to run. Something in Desiree's brain clicked into place, as if all she needed was to know she could leave if she wanted to, and there would be no reprisals from Theron. Rather than go, she ground her heels into the dirt, her fist clenching at her side. She shook her head in a gesture she hoped would convey her determination. Theron winked one heavily lashed eye, then slipped into the void of darkness that was the mouth of the mausoleum. Desiree strained to listen. All was silence within. The seconds stretched out into what felt like hours as she stood, still bent at the waist, like some sort of odd statue. She pulled her finely pointed wooden stake from her pocket, gripping it in her hand. In reality, less than a minute passed before she heard a shuffle, then a crash as stone hit stone. She rushed to the entrance of the building. More seconds passed while her eyes adjusted to the near-pitch blackness of the interior. As everything came into focus, Desiree made out the enormous back of Theron stooped over a figure sitting against the far wall. She took a step forward, nearly tripping over a toppled angel, broken to bits on the floor at her feet. There was no one else in the room. A smell, rank and putrid, assaulted her senses. Rather than slink away, she moved alongside Theron, the stake still tight in her hand. The creature on the floor, the thing could not be called a man, shrank back against the wall as if it could disappear into the pores of stone. A black sludge slid out of the corners of its mouth, dripping off its chin and onto the filthy fabric that at one time had been a shirt. The beast held something in its hands, something that nearly made Desiree heave up the contents of her dinner. What it held was an arm, muscle, sinew, and bone visible from the gaping hole where a shoulder was once attached. Desiree realized with horror that the entire floor of the mausoleum was coated in the same black sludge that oozed from the vampire's mouth. Black sludge she knew would appear blood-red in the sunlight. She gagged, nearly dropping her stake as she brought her hand to her mouth. "Go wait outside," Theron said to her, his gaze firmly on the vampire at their feet. I'm fine," was all she said. She tried to only take shallow breaths, which helped. "Where are the others?" Theron kicked the leg of the wretch. It whined and tried to wriggle to the side, away from Theron, the arm still gripped in one hand. If this was an example of the vampire race, she and Theron could easily dispatch them to hell. "Don't know," the thing seemed to say, or rather snarl. It lurched to his side, then tried to pull itself away from them. Theron kicked it back into a sitting position. "It's so pathetic." Had it not been for the arm in its hand or her history with these creatures, she may have felt sorry for it. This one is, that's why it's been left behind. Sometimes they go mad with bloodlust. Not all of them will be so weak, so pathetic, as you say. He crouched down in front of it, snatching away the bloody arm. The vampire howled as if in physical pain as it tried to grab at its meal. Theron ignored it. "Now tell me, where are the others?" The vampire bared its teeth at Theron, bubbles of blood and saliva popping as it breathed through its mouth. "You won't find them, traitor. Jaxon leads." "Did you know this one? And who is Jaxon?" Desiree asked. "I knew all of them, unfortunately. This one's name, it was Joshua. Jaxon is one of the smarter of the dozen I came across with. He could actually carry on a decent conversation." I think I had held out hope that he, or out of all of them, had come to his senses and moved on. Seems I was wrong. Like many before him, it appears that Jaxon has developed delusions of grandeur. But back to the moment at hand. Joshua here, he's the one who overdrained your friend. Theron's deep voice echoed through the darkness. He drank from Sylvie? Desiree ground her teeth, her fingers dancing around her wooden stake. Want to put this miserable being out of its misery, Des? Out of the corner of her eye, Desiree saw Theron watching her. This feels more like an execution than a fair fight, she said, her gaze never leaving the now half-whining, half-snarling vampire. I sat in a heap below them. Desiree wondered how aware the creature was of the situation. Does it matter? We can't allow this waste of skin to live, Des. Look at the thing that was snacking on. There's no reason left inside its skull. This thing, he kicked the vampire's leg, will continue to kill without thought. Think of the women and children who live in this town. Those innocents won't stand a chance against this feral beast. That's all it is, Des. A feral, lethal animal. If you won't kill the thing, I will. Theron reached down. One twist of his powerful hand would send the vampire's head rolling. No, Desiree grabbed Theron's hand. I can do it.